Pablo Torre joins us now. Pablo Torre Finds Out is the name of the ever-growing, ever more popular podcast. Wanted to throw some subject matter at you that I have not talked about in a couple of weeks. On First Take, Cam Newton was objecting to how it is that Mark Andrews was getting ripped for not meeting the media after dropping the ball. And he mentioned, by way of comparison, why do reporters get to tell Mark Andrews that he has to come out and talk when FS1 has this lawsuit all around its sports department, and none of those people have come out and talked? I understand it's a false equivalency. Wait a minute, you laugh, but when Gilbert Arenas says something, you say, well, this is the player's perspective. And I understand that you might not like the equivalency, but this is the opinion of some players, most publicly Cam Newton.
Yes, but he's sorely mistaken, and it's proven out by the equivalency, right? It's a completely false equivalency between a legal matter and a performance on the field or in the field of play matter.
And what is your take here, Pablo, in what is fair play when it comes journalistically to the lawsuit in general? For example, I've made some mistakes over the years, most recently, I would say, in talking in any way about the Dwight Howard lawsuit. And I only did so because I got the permission from Dwight Howard once he talks about it publicly. Now it becomes a news item. That's always been my standard on these things. What is the correct standard now as all of these things change? Because anyone can allege anything in a lawsuit. And in the modern age, we're going to feed on it whether it's fair or not. There aren't going to be many standards. And furthermore, the mainstream media is going to lose by exhibiting any standards because it's going to be feeding frenzy on the internet and sort of like there is nothing that's happened with Fox Sports recently that has been talked more about than what's going on with that lawsuit.
Yeah, I do like that Cam Newton is now like an ombudsman character. I just appreciate that. I like his hats. I like his journalistic curiosities. I'm into it. The thing that he is saying, though, look, Amin is fundamentally right. Like, of course, these are lawsuits where people are afraid to comment because there might be further litigation. They might get sued themselves or be liable for stuff. I get it. Not the same. But the notion that Cam's at with like, hey, this is humiliating. You make us talk about this. Why don't you talk about it? You could have put in another example, and I think the point would have been well or better made. There is a bit of a hypocrisy when it comes to media people not wanting to answer tough questions that we would expect out of the public interest, celebrities in general, to have to answer. And now, Dan, to your point, like the fact that everybody is a public figure, the fact that everybody is public enough and interest, the bar on that is so low because everybody is interested in something weird. Okay, well, maybe there's an audience member who wants to know the answer to this question. It's as messy as you're painting it. I think the distinction between you're famous, you get paid a lot of money, therefore we can hold you to account to tell us how it felt when you did something publicly that was embarrassing. It's just not about athletes. It's not about celebrities, actors, Hollywood people. Everybody now meets that qualification. And so, yeah, it's uncomfortable. Everybody in talking to microphones should be uncomfortable that someone like Cam Newton wearing that hat is going to be like, you should feel the way that I feel.
Pablo, you said, the questions that media people don't want to answer. What's an example of that? I'd love to hear an example of someone in the media did something in the workplace, like so on camera, on mic, that was a failure or an embarrassment and then refused to answer questions about it.
Well, I think one basic thing that an athlete, for instance, could be frustrated by, understandably, is that we know everything about how much money they're making.
Yeah, that's true.
We know all of the details. And in fact, we know them to the point where we argue about it and how they don't deserve it. And in reality, right, like, again, and the excuse had been, you know this, again, having explored such cap sheets, the example was justified because they got paid so much. Mm-hmm. And I just think that the thing we're trying to bridge all of the time is, when do you have so much economic, cultural, celebrity privilege that you get a higher degree of scrutiny? And I think there are just a lot of people around who actually don't want that. and shouldn't want that. And if they knew that this was maybe going to come for them, wouldn't wouldn't want the athletes to if it meant protecting themselves. And I happen to be one of them. So like, yeah, it's uncomfortable, but then you go into the realm, Dan, of like, hey, sports is different. And then we have to just explain very carefully why we think sports is different. And maybe there's an argument there. I'd like to make it, but it's an increasingly less persuasive one.
I think it's not a terrible idea for a Pablo Torre finds out investigation to find whatever it is your theoretical ground zero is on when all of this changed our obsession with the money and athletes. It's the biggest reason that there's a gulf between them and the customers. It's a poison. We all know all of their salaries, and there's a ground zero on when that started, because that stuff used to be private, and then it didn't become private anymore, and people who were giving out that information end up getting rewarded by it, because we know what everybody in sports makes, except Belichick sometimes when he coaches, a coach here and there, and then Goodell gets really mad when his salary is out there.
Yes, I think the immediate hypocrisy, right, is not, and this is where I would push back on Cam, I guess, like the real beneficiaries of the unequal treatment between athletes, let's say, and other people, maybe similarly situated, increasingly similarly situated, isn't media people. It's their bosses. Mm-hmm. Like, you want to know, I would want to know, hey, your front office, what are you guys getting paid? Right? Like, it's uncapped, number one, typically. It's a fascinating thing. What would you spend on executives when there was no restriction on how much you could pay them? And the Goodell thing is maybe the most flagrant one, because the answer invariably ends up having sticker shock, right? It's like 50. Fact check me, please. Jeremy, I trust your journalistic ethics. Please tell me what Roger Goodell has been making the last couple of years. But it's like $50 million or something.
I think it's more private because he didn't like that it was out there. I think it's harder to find out now because he didn't enjoy that it was out there before when it was in the 30s.
Well, and I think the other thing that you can lump onto that is also the availability. So, for example, Pablo's, well, I guess not beloved Knicks anymore because he's a Sixer fan, but Leon Rose has famously spoken to the media, I think, twice since he took over.
Yes.
He just doesn't talk. That's it.
And the Knicks are fun and good.
Well, I mean,
so
not the entire time, but yes, they're fun and good now, but he still does not talk. It's easy to say, well, I don't need to talk. The team is doing great. They could talk for themselves. But there was a time when they weren't doing so great, and this dude still was like, yeah, I'm not talking to the media. I don't need to.
But I do want to make the case for why sports and athletes do deserve to be held to a degree of scrutiny that is higher, right, than just, let's say, again, the average citizen. I mean, it was hard, right? I remember Naomi Osaka, the tennis player, of course, basically making an argument. I fundamentally feel not just uncomfortable, but I feel that it's unfair that Naomi Osaka, gets scrutinized in my most emotionally harrowing moments after a defeat by people who are just trying to pick at the bones of my life. It feels mean, it feels cruel, it feels unfair, it feels, in her view, I think, institutionally, just wrong. And I do have an argument against that, right? Like, the whole point of performing in public, fundamentally, is that you get the benefits of the crowd, but also the pain. Like, if we are to consider what you do important, people are going to care enough to dissect it. And at a certain point, adversarial questioning, and again, there are lines, of course, and Dan, as a columnist, you know those lines, where it's too far, it's too mean, it's too invasive. But generally, getting asked hard questions that, by the way, you can say no comment to, or you can evade it however way, as many as Derek Jeter used to all the time in New York. You have the right to do that, but the questions should be asked. I'm not saying that they shouldn't be held to a degree of scrutiny that's crazy relative to an average person. I just think that it's fair for them to then say, well, what about everybody else who I think would fall under that same criteria of public benefit and therefore public pain?
I agree with you, but I think one of the aspects of athlete empowerment is that they're beginning to say, as a group, collectively, no, I don't have to avail myself in an open locker room after a game. If I want to be private with this, I want to be private. If I'm Mark Andrews, I agree that if you're cheering for Mark Andrews when he's the hero of a game, it would be nice if he availed himself when he misses the winning catch. But does he have to? And I think more and more we're going to see less and less media access for athletes who now can break their own news on their Instagram page.
Yeah, wait, I'm curious about that. Sorry to interrupt. Dan, how do you feel about that? Like the locker room reporters out of there dynamic.
I don't blame all of those people for realizing that that's not something they need in their life anymore, that it's invasive. And while it prevents me from doing my job and does hurt me, and I'd prefer it not be that way, I understand exactly why it is that they don't want us around anymore. They don't need us anymore. And you can do it even when you don't have pedigree like Leon Rose in the biggest market. You can do it because you can just decide it now. And the commissioner of the league has been trying to make access something that's contractually important because he believes that these relationships are important. And the commissioner of the league has been trying to make access something that's contractually important because he believes that these relationships are important. And his employees keep telling him, we don't want to do that. And then you hear him publicly say, yeah, I'm not going to be able to keep doing this forever because you can't help but notice that all of those seats on the sidelines that used to go to the media have now gone to people who are paying much more for those seats. Like, that's happened in the last 15 years.
One of the funniest things is when I went to cover some Final Fours. I was in Houston covering the Final Four for Sports Illustrated a zillion years ago now. And it's the one place, I don't know if it's still the same way. Maybe someone can correct me who's been more recently.
I got good seats at the Final Four.
Oh,
like
Dan.
oh, my God.
I was sitting in front of Drake. Drake and Vince Young were behind me, and I was like a fact checker at Sports Illustrated. Like, God bless how they used to respect us.
Oh, but it's also funny. You say, quote, used to respect us. Also had us sit in expensive seats to sit atop the Injustice and sell it for them. Like they'd give us the watchdogs the most expensive
comfy, man.
seats. Yeah, those are good seats.